Okay, so I want to make one more video today, and this is about essentially just making directories using the Odin operating system package over here. And that's kind of what prompted me to make the video I made earlier on, if you happen to have watched that one, about just making packages in general using the Linux terminal. Anyway, so you can see here, we have the OS package, and also, if you're not familiar, underneath, we have the old OS package. So, if you're very new to Odin, you will not have realized that there is currently a transitional period going on where Odin is essentially updating the package which is responsible for handling generic operating system functions. This operating system package, to the best of my knowledge, is kind of platform agnostic. A make file or make directory command using this directory should work on Windows, Linux, and Mac. I believe if you go further down, there are packages specifically for Windows commands and Linux commands and possibly Macintosh commands. Don't quote me on that one. I've not looked that far into it. But the operating system package itself should just be generally what you use when you want to make simple, universal things that you would expect to be able to do on every operating system. And I just decided to play around with it, have a go at just making a directory and see what I get out of it. And the reason for this video is I didn't get exactly what I personally was expecting. That's not to say that this is wrong. What I do get is correct. It just kind of left me like I was expecting something slightly different, and I'll show you what I mean. So right here, I just have this. This is my simple code. I was actually practicing bit sets, which is why the package is called bitset. Ignore that, we're making a directory. Anyway, so all I'm doing, importing core operating system. The only thing that's going to run is this OS make directory, and we're going to use it to make the directory called new directory. So over here, ILS, all I have is Odin, one main Odin file. So I type in Odin run dot. If you're not familiar, what that does is it's going to tell the Odin compiler to build my executable, run my executable, and then delete the executable, so I won't have any files left over. This is probably mostly what you use when you're testing, not when you're actually trying to ship a file to somebody else. But if we run it, it works. And if I do LSL right now, we have the new directory. So you might be asking, Jack, what the fuck you on about? 2 seconds ago, you said you didn't get exactly what you expected. But yet here you are, you have a new directory right there. And like I said, this does work as expected. I'm not saying it's wrong in the slightest, but what I was expecting was slightly different, which led me to learn a little bit more about Linux today, because that's one of the reasons I've dropped the Odin off a bit and not been making many videos. I realized I do not understand enough about Linux, and I figured I should if I'm actually going to be using it. And that comes down to the permission strings right here. What we see is we have the D for directory, the read, write, execute, read, execute, read, execute. I'm going to assume you actually know a little bit what is going on there. And if I do the make dir command and I just do a test directory, and then I print out that again, you will see test directory and new directory are identical. So again, you may be thinking, Jack, what the fuck? You got exactly what you needed out of that. And again, that is true. That is correct. But the thing that confused me, because one thing what I like to do when I'm learning this is I like to read through, the source code and the documentation, just to try and really get an understanding of what I'm doing. And when I did this, I looked at the make directory documentation over here, and I saw all I needed was to pass in a string, which is you see over here. All we do, we just pass in a string and it makes the directory. And then there is a permission object that gets passed in by default. And by default, it already has a value which is called permissions default directory. So I was curious as to what that was initially set as to see what I was going to get. So if I click over here, we will see that permissions is actually a bitset, a distinct bitset, which is why this is called bitset. I was looking into a little bit of bitsets when I read that to make sure I understood them properly. And I realized this bitset is made out of permissions flag. And permissions flag is very straightforward, exactly what you'd expect. You have all the different types of users of a Unix-based operating system. You have the user, the group, and the others. And we can see over here that the user group is allowed, the user group is allowed the read, write, execute. The group gets the read and write, the read and execute, and the others also get read and execute, which is the default when I make a new directory on my own computer. So that's working perfectly fine, but here's the bit that slightly confused me and also led me to learn a little bit more about Linux. I then decided to look into what a permission flag is up here, and then I looked down here and I saw all the different kind of constants that are associated with this bitset. And if we look in the documentation above, you would have seen that is permissions default directory. So this is what automatically gets passed in when we're just making a simple directory. And I clicked on it to see what it was. Was it actually the user is read, write, execute, is the group read and execute, and also is the other read and execute. And it says down here that permissions should be everybody gets to read, everybody gets to write, and everybody gets to execute. And if you are experienced with Linux and stuff, you might be expecting that, yeah, this makes perfect sense. But to me, it didn't make sense, because over here, it's telling me everybody should be able to read, write, and execute. But here we can clearly see that the groups and the others do not get that permission. And to further kind of illustrate that fact, if we go down here, we can see that we have the write all, and we have the read all, and we have the execute all. And these up here do state that everybody gets to execute, everybody gets to read, and everybody gets to write, which is down here. So you think the permission string that gets returned from this should be everybody also gets the write. So what went on there? Why did that not work? And I did a little bit of research, and I went back to the book I've been reading, and I found this command here, the umask command, and it works a lot like the change mod commands, a little bit like it. So essentially, from what I gathered and my understanding of this, is by default, this thing has some values already set inside of it, and it sets the values automatic. It helps set the automatic values when I make a directory or I make a new file. And by default, let's say when I make a directory, by default, everybody has every permission already set. And then in the background, there is a mask applied to it. So this command right here allows me to set the values of that mask. And that mask, when applied to the permission string, states you're making a new directory, but we do not want others, and we do not want the groups to be able to write to that directory. And you can see here that when I use the make directory command for test, that mask was applied. And obviously, when we make a directory using this procedure over here, that mask is also applied. So what I'm gathering is that make directory command somewhere down in the operating system says we need to make a new directory, and then the operating system always goes ahead and say we're making a new directory, look at what the mask is, and then apply that mask to it. So what I feel like will happen is I'm going to assume you know a little bit about this command. So the first digit I don't fully understand, but the next three work exactly like change mod. But rather than stating that 777 would give everybody all of the permissions, this would apply the mask to delete all of the permissions. So if I wanted to make a new directory and then have everybody be able to, have all the permissions set, I believe if I set all these to 0, and then let's just go ahead and, just change the name of this directory over here. And then we'll do an Odin run dot. That will work. And then if I lsl everything out here, we can see that the first thing you need to do is you actually need to save this. And then if I do Odin run dot, and then I do it again, does that? Yes, there we go. We can see the new directory up here, the ADSF, and everybody has all of the permissions already set. So that's one thing to kind of know, I guess. For me, anyways, you might have already have understood Linux much better than me. And when I realized that the groups and the others didn't have the right command, even though kind of over here it implies that it would, you might have went, yeah, Jack, you idiots, that was what was always going to happen because the mask gets applied before the directory is fully created. But I didn't know that. And I've been learning more. So yeah, that is one way that you could do that. You could apply the mask. So if I, again, was to do the umask, my understanding is this umask command, just like this, isn't permanent. There's probably some setting in some configuration file which will let me make a permanent mask. I believe if I was to close out of this terminal and then open up another terminal, and then I was to go back inside of this Odin programming, into my examples, into bit sets, and then I was to make a brand new directory. We'll just add even more letters because I can't be bothered to think of a test name. We will write to that, and then we do Odin run dot. I'm assuming, from what I understand, umask kind of just applies temporarily to this terminal session. So when I run this again, and then I do an ls.l, we see the new one goes back to the default mask. So that is one way that I can sort of temporarily get rid of certain permissions or add certain permissions for a particular terminal session. Another way that I could make sure that something gets all of the permissions I want down here is I can simply go down here and I can say mode. I can make a mode that I want the file to essentially get. I feel like my explanation's going a bit here. But down here, you can see I'm making a mode, which is just an OS permissions. And as you saw up here, permissions is just a bit set. And then bit set is just essentially an array of bits that works off an enumeration, which was the bit flag fields somewhere over here. If we go back to make, we see here that permissions uses the permission flags. Permissions flag is just an enumeration. So when I want to set the permissions, I just essentially pass in the values from this enumeration over here. And then I can say, OS, I want you to change the modes. I want you to change the permissions associated with a file. In this case, we have the new directory that we were making up here. And then I want you to give it that mode there. So then I can come into here. I'll just delete this for now. I'll rewrite this. So what we'll see is that new directory over here, when we run this Odin command, and then we do the ls.l, new directory has had the permissions changed. So if for whatever reason, when I was making a new directory and I really wanted to make sure that the groups and the others also had the right permission set, I could go into change mode down here. And I imagine I could have made it equal to, where are we? Equal to this right here. So if I take this and then I just copy it and then I come into over here, I feel like if I do operating system dot and then I want to paste that into there, and then I save this, I feel like that should apply every permission to it, if I'm understanding what is going on right there. So if we just do Odin run dot again, I realized I'm not fully zoomed in, so that might actually be hard for you guys to read if you're following along. So Odin run dot, we run everything again, and then we'll print out what all these are. And yeah, there we go. We can see that every permission that this permissions default directory actually contains was applied to the new directory. Yeah, that's about it. That's all I wanted to kind of go over. You know, why when I made my new directory, I didn't get what I was expecting, but why that wasn't actually incorrect. It's just I wasn't familiar enough with Linux and understanding that there's kind of a permission mask applied before something is created by default. And yeah, it kind of goes to show I've still got more to learn about Linux, which is what I'm slowly doing in the background. But, you know, life is busy, so I don't get to make these videos as much as I would want to. Anyways, hopefully you learned something watching this, and I will see you in the next one.